Okay, everybody, so our lesson for today is going to be on the story of Jesus calming the storm. Now, you can find the story in 3 places in the Bible. It's in Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27, Mark chapter 4, verses 35 to 41, and Luke chapter 8, verses 22 to 25. Now, I'm going to ask you guys to pause the video and read at least one of those accounts. Okay, you don't have to read all 3. I think it'd be good if you do, because it's nice to see the comparison between the 3 different accounts. But read at least one of them. Doesn't matter which one you pick, but pick at least one to read. So pause the video right now, read, and then come back to me. I want to give you a little bit of a context for the timeline in which this story is happening. If you look earlier in the chapter in the book of Matthew, you'll see that Jesus, prior to calming the storm, Jesus has healed a leper. This is someone with a severe skin disease. He's healed a servant from a distance. So basically someone has come to him and said, "Lord God, my servant is dying. Can you please heal him?" And Jesus said, "Yeah, let's go and I'll see him." And the man said, "No, I believe that you have power. You don't have to actually come and see him. You can just say he's healed and it'll be done." And Jesus was like, "Yeah, absolutely. You have faith and it's done. Your servant is healed." So he's healed over a distance. He doesn't even have to be there physically to see the person or touch the person. He healed Peter. Simon Peter is one of his disciples, kind of in the inner circle, Jesus' inner circle of 3 friends. He healed his mother-in-law, so a close family member. And then he's been casting out demons and healing multiple other people who have various illnesses. Okay, in Mark, the chapter before this account, we see that he's been casting out demons. And then in Luke also tells us again about this servant that Jesus healed from a distance. Luke also tells us about a young man who actually was dead. And Jesus comes, he's walking into a city, and the funeral procession is coming out of the city. And the man is in his coffin, and Jesus raises that young man from the dead. So this is the context. These are things that have happened prior to the beginning of our story of Jesus calming the waters. And this is important to know because, first of all, these aren't everything that Jesus has done. This is just a small section of things that we see that Jesus has done up to this point. But it's enough to see that Jesus has incredible power, and power over sickness, over supernatural forces, over death, and over time and space. Right? Distance doesn't affect his powers. He still has power over great distances. Okay, so now we come up to this moment. We see that Jesus and his disciples are traveling from Galilee across the Sea of Galilee, sometimes also called the Sea of Kinnereth, to the region of Gerasa, which is also sometimes called the region of Gadara. Okay, and we know that because if we zoom ahead in Mark chapter 5, verse 1, we're told that's where he's going. Okay, now all 3 accounts, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, also say that up till now, he's been teaching, he's been preaching, he's been performing miracles, and he's tired. It's kind of the end of a long day. He's been working really hard. And they get into this boat, they're traveling across, and he falls asleep, right? Not really surprising. This is hopefully, most likely, what the boat would have looked like. And when it says Jesus fell asleep in the stern or in the front of the boat, this is kind of what it would have looked like. So he's in kind of a secluded area, away from the water, away from the wind. That's where he's at. Okay, so Jesus is asleep, and they're traveling across the lake, across the Sea of Galilee, and suddenly a storm springs up. Now, if we look at our map, notice that this is kind of like a mountainous area. So all around the lake are mountains, and the lake is going to be a low spot. If we're talking weather, we've got cold air coming from off of the Mediterranean Sea, and when it reaches, comes down through the mountains, and when it reaches the lake, the air that's already there at the lake is going to be warm and humid. And with the connection of those two types of air, it's going to cause a storm. And it's going to arrive like that, and then it's going to leave like that. Okay, so and they're big. The word that some translations in the Bible use is a squall. I mean, high winds, high waves, scary, especially since you don't really see it coming. Okay, now think about who is in the boat other than Jesus. Okay, we know that at least 4 of the disciples who are traveling with Jesus are fishermen. Okay, the Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, and then another set of brothers, James and John. Okay, so it's 2 sets of brothers, 4 people who the Bible tells us specifically were fishermen. That was their trade. Okay, they were fishing with their fathers when Jesus called them. Okay, now this is important. Young Jewish men under the age of 10 would study at the synagogues until the rabbis, the teachers, would choose who they wanted to be their disciples. Okay, and usually that was chosen by the time they were like preteen, so 10, 11, 12. If you weren't chosen, you went back home and you learned your father's trade. Okay, so we've got Simon Peter, that's one person, right? 2 names. Simon Peter and his brother Andrew, and then the brothers James and John, who are older. They're going to be in their 20s or 30s, maybe even older than that, and they've been fishermen for basically their whole lives. Okay, now not only are they fishermen, like they live and work out on the water, not only are they fishermen, but this lake, the lake of Galilee, is the one that they've been working on for their entire life. So they're used to this kind of weather. They know what to expect. They know how to handle it when a big storm pops up. And Jesus, on the other hand, is a carpenter. Jesus grew up working his father's trade, which was woodworking. 2 completely different things. Okay, he would not know how to handle the boat in a storm. So it's really interesting that the disciples go up to Jesus and say, "Save us." And "Don't you care if we drown? We're going to drown." And it's kind of bizarre because they would have known what they were doing. In a practical sense, Jesus doesn't. And I kind of wonder, well, what did they expect him to do? He doesn't know how to handle a boat. They know how to handle a boat. Maybe the storm was a lot worse than they're used to seeing. But it almost seems to be more that they're annoyed that Jesus is sleeping and they're all working to get across the lake in this giant storm, and he's not doing anything. He's just sleeping. He's just lying there. Okay. So only in the book of Mark, of these 3 passages, which tell the same story, only the book of Mark is where is the only one where they ask a question. And they ask, "Don't you care? Don't you care if we drown?" Okay. In the book of Matthew, it's worded slightly differently. They actually are said to have said, "Lord, save us." Now remember, there was 12 some disciples. We don't know exactly how many were in the boat at this time. It might have actually been more than the 12 that we usually talk about. So with 3 different people telling the story, it's possible that we had, well, I'm sure all the disciples weren't saying the exact same thing. And so we have the account of a few different things of what were said, or the general idea of what the disciples are saying. So according to Matthew, the disciples did ask Jesus to save them. Okay, so which seems to indicate they expected some kind of supernatural, some kind of miracle to be performed. But again, I kind of wonder, what exactly were they expecting? Because we're told Jesus stands up, he tells the winds and the waves to stop, and they do, and everything is calm. It goes from a storm to nothing, to just a calm, perfect sailing weather lake. And that's when we're told that they are now terrified. Matthew and Luke use the words amazement or fear. Mark uses the word terrified. They are terrified. It's not necessarily the waves. It's not the storm. It's not the high winds that are necessarily scaring them. It's that Jesus spoke to the wind and the waves and the storm actually listened. That's what terrifies them. Okay. So let's think. So how does this story apply to us? Okay. In a general sense, I guess, we go through lots of storms in our lives. Okay. We could pretty fairly say that we're going through right now with everything going on with COVID-19. Okay. So then now the question becomes, do we believe that Jesus has the power to see us safely through this storm or any storm that comes our way, even if we don't see him actively working? Okay. The disciples didn't have that kind of faith. Jesus was sleeping. He wasn't actively doing anything. But he was there. And they've seen all these miracles that Jesus has performed. And their response is, don't you care? And their response is, we're going to drown. They don't believe that just Jesus' presence with them is going to be enough to see them safely through to the other side. Okay, so again, I ask the question, do we believe that Jesus has the power to see us safely through, even if we don't see him actively working? Okay. Here's another question. When we come across a storm, will we be like the disciples and will we demand that he do something? Right? Like they said in Matthew, Lord, save us. That's a pretty demanding thing. We're going to drown. And finally, do we believe that Jesus cares about our struggles? Okay, or are we going to be like the disciples in how Mark tells it and ask, don't you care? Don't you care if we drown? Obviously, yes, Jesus cares. Whether we see him working or not, he cares. Okay, all throughout the Bible, we are never promised physical safety. We are never promised physical safety, but we are always promised that God will be there with us, that Jesus will be there to weather the storm with us. Okay, and we need to have confidence that he has the power over all of our concerns, whether it is sickness, whether it's a supernatural issue that we're dealing with. No matter how close or how far we feel away from God, the distance doesn't make any difference to him. He has power over that distance. And even in things that we would consider a natural disaster, God has power over those things as well. Are we trusting him? Are we trusting him? That's a very important question.